The gallery was hushed in that particular way expensive spaces demanded, silent but alive, full of held breath and careful footsteps. Maya moved through it like a ghost, which was fitting since she'd spent most of her 24 years perfecting the art of being overlooked. The champagne flutes she balanced on her tray caught the light from the crystal chandeliers, throwing fractured rainbows across her hands. She'd learned to keep her eyes down, her smile pleasant and blank, her presence negligible. It was safer that way, especially here. The Manhattan elite glittered around her in their $1,000 shoes and cashmere that cost more than her monthly rent. They discussed art with the kind of confident ignorance that came from never having to worry about the price of anything. Maya had been working these events for 6 months now, ever since her mother's medical bills had started eating through their savings like acid through paper. The pay was good. The invisibility was better. Except she wasn't actually invisible. Not in the way that mattered. She could see them, not their faces or their expensive clothes or their carefully maintained masks of cultured sophistication. She could see the truth that pulsed beneath their skin like a second heartbeat. The lies, the hunger, the desperate need. It had started when she was 12. This unwanted gift that turned every conversation into a minefield of contradictions. Her mother called it sensitivity. Maya called it a curse. Either way, it meant she'd learned to keep her mouth shut and her observations to herself. Tonight, though, something felt different. Wrong? The air itself seemed too thick, charged with an electricity that made the hair on her arms stand up. Maya wove between clusters of guests, refreshing drinks and collecting empty glasses, and tried to ignore the crawling sensation at the base of her skull. Then she saw him. He stood alone in front of a massive, abstract canvas, his stillness so complete it seemed to create a pocket of absolute zero in the warm, chattering space. Tall, with dark hair that fell just past his collar, and a face that could have been carved from marble. Beautiful and cold and utterly remote. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than her car, if her car hadn't been repossessed 3 months ago. But it wasn't his appearance that made Maya's breath catch. It was what she didn't see. Nothing. No pulse of emotion, no flicker of truth or deception, no desperate human need. He was a blank space in her perception, a void where a person should be. In 24 years, she'd never encountered anything like it. Maya realized she'd stopped walking. Worse, she was staring. His head turned, slowly, inevitably, and his eyes found hers across the gallery. They were gray, she noticed distantly. Gray like winter dawn, like steel, like the moment before a storm breaks. For 3 heartbeats they looked at each other, and Maya felt something shift in the air between them. Recognition, perhaps, or warning. Then someone jostled her elbow. Champagne sloshed dangerously close to the rim of a glass, and the spell broke. Maya jerked her gaze away, her cheeks burning. She needed to move, to disappear back into the role of invisible server where she belonged. She turned toward the kitchen, walking too fast, her heart hammering against her ribs. She made it halfway across the gallery before a hand closed around her wrist. The touch was cold. Not cool, not chilly. Cold like deep winter, like the bottom of a frozen lake. Maya gasped and spun, and found herself looking up into those gray eyes again. Up close, he was even more unsettling. Too perfect, too still, too other. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to run. You can see. His voice was quiet, barely above a murmur, but it cut through the ambient noise like a blade. It wasn't a question. Maya's mouth went dry. I don't know what you mean. The corner of his mouth moved. It might have been a smile, but there was no warmth in it. Yes, you do. He studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she found she couldn't move. His thumb pressed against her pulse point, and she knew he could feel how fast her heart was racing. Interesting. I didn't think any of your kind still existed. My kind? Maya tried to pull her wrist free. His grip didn't tighten, but she couldn't break it either. Like trying to move a mountain with her bare hands. Look, I'm just trying to work. Please let me go. In a moment. He tilted his head slightly, studying her the way someone might examine a curiosity in a museum. What's your name? Every fiber of her being told her not to answer, but his eyes held hers, and she heard herself say, Maya, Maya Chen. Maya. He said it like he was tasting it, testing the weight of it on his tongue. I'm Adrian Thorne. The name meant nothing to her, but she saw several nearby guests stiffen at the sound of it, their conversations faltering. One woman actually paled and took a step backward. Maya's confusion must have shown on her face because something that might have been amusement flickered in Adrian Thorne's expression. You really don't know, he said softly. That's refreshing. Or dangerous. I haven't decided which. Know what? Maya's voice came out shakier than she wanted. The cold from his hand was spreading up her arm, making her shiver. Please, I just need to get back to work before I get fired. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Then he released her wrist. Maya immediately cradled her arm against her chest, rubbing at the cold spot where his fingers had been. Go, he said. But we'll speak again, Maya Chen. Soon. It sounded like a promise and a threat wrapped into one. Maya didn't need to be told twice. She turned and fled toward the kitchen, her tray forgotten, her professional composure shattered. Behind her, she could feel his gaze following her like cold fingers down her spine. When she finally pushed through the swinging door into the bright, harsh fluorescence of the kitchen, she was trembling. You okay? Her co-worker Daniel asked, looking up from the tray of canapes he was arranging. You look like you've seen a ghost. Maya wanted to laugh, but it came out more like a sob. Something like that. She should have gone straight home after her shift ended at midnight. Should have taken the subway to her cramped studio apartment in Queens and locked the door and forgotten about gray eyes and cold hands and the first person in her entire life whose emotions she couldn't read. Should have been smart. Instead, she found herself standing outside the gallery 20 minutes after everyone else had left, staring up at the darkened windows and trying to understand why every survival instinct she possessed was at war with an equally strong compulsion to know more. Curiosity is dangerous. The voice came from behind her, and Maya spun around with a yelp. Adrian Thorne stood in the pool of shadow between two streetlights, his hands in his pockets, looking for all the world like he'd been waiting for her. In the darkness, his skin seemed to catch what little light there was, giving him an otherworldly luminescence. Especially for someone like you. Are you following me? Maya demanded, trying to sound brave and probably failing miserably. No. He stepped forward into the light, and Maya had to fight the urge to step back. I'm simply waiting. There's a difference. Waiting for what? For you to decide. He moved closer, his footsteps utterly silent on the pavement. Whether you're going to run or stay, whether fear or curiosity is stronger. Maya's hands clenched at her sides. She should run. Every rational part of her brain was screaming at her to run. But she'd spent her entire life running from her own strangeness, from the isolation that came with seeing too much. And she was so tired of it. This man, this thing, whatever he was, he knew something about her, about what she could do. "What did you mean?" she heard herself ask. "About my kind?" Adrian Thorne smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. It didn't make him look warmer. If anything, it made him more terrifying. "There it is, that hunger for truth. It's in your blood, you know. Your ancestors were called seers. They could perceive the nature of things, see through glamours and deceptions, read the intentions of the heart. Most died out centuries ago, hunted primarily." "Hunted by what?" His smile widened, showing teeth that seemed just slightly too sharp in the streetlight. "By us." The bottom dropped out of Maya's stomach. She took a step backward, then another. Adrian didn't move, just watched her with those terrible, beautiful eyes. "What are you?" she whispered. "I think you already know." He spread his hands slowly, a gesture that could have been peaceful or threatening, depending on how you looked at it. "Your gift tells you truth. So look at me, Maya, Chen. Really look. What do you see?" She didn't want to. God, she didn't want to. But her gift had never been something she could turn off, only ignore. So she looked, and she saw death. Old death, ancient death. Death that had walked the earth for centuries, wearing a handsome face. She saw hunger, carefully controlled but never truly satisfied. She saw loneliness so profound it made her chest ache. And underneath it all, something else. Something that felt almost like regret. "Vampire," she breathed. "Yes." He said it simply, without drama or apology. "And you're standing in a very dark street alone, having that conversation with me. So either you're remarkably stupid or remarkably brave. I'm curious which." Maya's laugh came out high and slightly hysterical. "Probably stupid. Definitely stupid. I should go." "You should," he agreed. But he moved faster than her eye could follow, and suddenly he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his body. "But you won't. Not yet. Because you have questions, and I'm the only one who can answer them." He was right. Damn him. Maya stared up at his face, at the inhuman perfection of it, and felt her fear warring with fascination. "Why tell me any of this? Why not just—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Kill you?" He said it so casually, like they were discussing the weather. "Because you interest me, and because—" He paused, something flickering across his expression too quickly for her to catch. "Because I have a problem, and you might be the solution." The gallery was empty the next night when Maya arrived, summoned by a text message from an unknown number. She'd spent the entire day convinced she wouldn't come, that she'd delete the message and forget the whole thing and go back to her safe, lonely life. Then her mother had called from the hospital, her voice weak and apologetic, as she explained about the new treatment the doctors were recommending. The one insurance wouldn't cover, and Maya had felt the walls closing in around her again. So here she was, stepping into the darkened gallery where shadows pooled like water, her heart in her throat and her phone clutched in one hand like a talisman. Adrian materialized from the darkness so smoothly it was like he'd been part of it. "You came. You said you had a problem." Maya's voice only shook a little. "And I need money. So let's skip the dramatic vampire thing and get to the point." Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "Direct. I appreciate that." He gestured toward the back of the gallery, and Maya followed him through a door she'd never noticed before, down a corridor lined with more art, into a private office that looked like it belonged in a different century. Dark wood, leather chairs, and books that smelled of age and secrets. Adrian moved behind the massive desk, but didn't sit. Instead, he pulled out a photograph and slid it across the polished surface. Maya picked it up, studying the image of a young woman with dark hair and desperate eyes. "Her name is Sophie Winters," Adrian said. "3 weeks ago, she came to me seeking protection. She'd witnessed something she shouldn't have, a murder, committed by someone with powerful friends, someone who wants her silenced permanently." Maya looked up from the photograph. "And you helped her because I gave her my word." He said it with such finality that Maya understood this was important to him in a way she didn't quite grasp yet. "I offered her sanctuary in my home, protection from those who would harm her." "Okay." Maya set the photo down. "So what's the problem?" "The problem is that someone in my household is betraying her location. Sophie was attacked 2 nights ago while walking in my private gardens. She survived only because I happened to be nearby." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Someone in my own house is feeding information to her enemies. Someone close enough to know her movements. And I can't tell who." Understanding crashed over Maya like cold water. "Because you can't read them. You're looking for tells in body language, listening for inconsistencies, but you can't see the lie itself." "Precisely." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "But you can. You can look at each member of my household and tell me who's lying, who's betraying Sophie, who's betraying me. You want me to come to your house, where you live, with other vampires." Maya heard the words coming out of her mouth and couldn't quite believe she was saying them. The pay would be substantial. Adrian named a figure that made Maya's breath catch. It was enough to cover her mother's treatment, enough to catch up on rent, enough to change everything. "And I would guarantee your safety. Anyone who touched you would answer to me." "Why should I trust that?" "Because I give you the same thing I gave Sophie Winters. My word." He straightened, and in the dim light of the office, he looked like something out of a medieval painting, ancient and terrible and oddly noble. "I am king of this territory, Maya. My word is law, and I'm offering you my protection in exchange for your help." Maya wanted to say no, wanted to tell him to find someone else, to leave her alone, to let her go back to her safe, small life. But safety was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore, and he was offering her a way out. A dangerous way, a terrifying way, but a way nonetheless. "How long?" she asked. "A few days? Perhaps a week. However long it takes to identify the traitor." He watched her face carefully. "You can walk away now. I won't stop you. But if you agree, I need your answer tonight." Sophie's time is running out. Maya closed her eyes and thought of her mother's voice on the phone, thin with pain and worry. Thought of the bills piling up on her tiny kitchen counter. Thought of spending the rest of her life serving champagne to people who looked through her like she didn't exist. Then she thought of gray eyes and cold hands and the first person in her entire life who'd seen her gift for what it was. "I'll do it," she said, and felt the axis of her world shift beneath her feet. Adrian's house was not what she expected. Maya had pictured something gothic and gloomy, all gargoyles and wrought iron. Instead, the car that picked her up the following evening, driven by a silent, unsmiling man she suspected was also not human, delivered her to a modern townhouse in the Upper East Side. All clean lines and tall windows, an understated elegance that spoke of wealth so old it didn't need to announce itself. Inside was different. The moment Maya stepped through the door, she felt it. The weight of age, the sense of things that had existed for far longer than they should. The walls might be painted in fashionable grays and whites, but underneath she could sense stone and shadow. This was a place that had been here, in one form or another, for a very long time. Adrian was waiting in the entrance hall, and Maya was struck again by how still he could be, like a statue or a predator waiting to strike. He studied her for a moment. She'd worn her best clothes, which meant clean jeans and a sweater that didn't have any holes, and something that might have been amusement touched his features. "You came," he said. "You sound surprised." "Pleasantly so. Most humans have better survival instincts." He gestured deeper into the house. "Come, I'll introduce you to the household. There are 7 vampires who live here permanently, plus various staff. One of them is the traitor." Maya followed him through a corridor lined with art that probably belonged in museums, her heart hammering. 7 vampires, 7 immortal, dangerous beings, and she was going to have to look each one in the eye and see their truth. The enormity of what she'd agreed to was starting to sink in, and it felt like drowning. They entered a large sitting room where several figures were arranged with the kind of casual elegance that came from centuries of practice. They all turned when Adrian entered, and Maya felt the weight of their attention like physical pressure. "Everyone," Adrian said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "This is Maya Chen. She's a guest in this house and under my personal protection. Anyone who harms her answers to me. Is that understood?" A chorus of nods and murmured agreements. Maya tried not to notice how several pairs of eyes lingered on her throat. "Maya is a seer," Adrian continued, and the reaction was immediate. Several vampires straightened. One hissed softly. A woman with ice-blonde hair actually stood up, her expression shifting from bored curiosity to sharp interest. "A seer?" she repeated. "I thought they were extinct." "Apparently not." Adrian's hand touched Maya's shoulder briefly, another shock of cold through her sweater. "She's here to help us identify the traitor. I trust you'll all cooperate fully with her investigation." The blonde woman, Celeste, Maya, would learn later, smiled slowly. "Of course. We have nothing to hide." Except she did. They all did. As Maya looked around the room, her gift opened like a flower in sunlight, and she saw the lies blooming beneath their beautiful faces, small ones mostly, pretenses and polite deceptions, the social lubricants that made even immortal society function. But somewhere in this tangle of half-truths and careful omissions was something darker, something that meant death for Sophie Winters. Maya took a breath and stepped forward. "I'd like to speak with each of you privately, starting now if possible." Adrian nodded. "My study is available. Celeste, you first." And so it began. One by one, Maya interviewed the members of Adrian's household. She asked careful questions and listened to their answers and watched the truth pulse beneath their words like a second heartbeat. Most were exactly what they appeared to be: loyal servants, ancient creatures bound to Adrian by complicated ties of debt and obligation and something that might have been genuine affection, though filtered through immortal sensibilities. But not all of them. By the 3rd day, Maya had narrowed it down to 3 possibilities. Celeste, the ice blonde who watched Maya with sharp, calculating eyes. Marcus, Adrian's second-in-command, who radiated controlled violence and spoke very little. And Thomas, a younger vampire, only 2 centuries dead, who smiled too much and whose easy charm felt like a weapon. The problem was that all three of them were lying about something. The question was what, and whether it had anything to do with Sophie Winters. Maya was sitting in Adrian's study late in the evening, reviewing her notes and trying to ignore how tired she was, when the door opened. She looked up, expecting Adrian. Instead, Sophie Winters herself stood in the doorway. In person, she was smaller than her photograph suggested, with dark circles under her eyes and a fragility that made Maya's chest ache. She moved like someone who'd learned to expect attacks from any direction. "You're the seer," Sophie said quietly. It wasn't a question. Maya nodded. "Maya, I wanted to thank you." Sophie came into the room hesitantly, like a deer testing a clearing. "For helping, for risking yourself like this." "I'm not doing it for free," Maya said, trying to sound practical and not defensive. "And I haven't found anything yet." "But you will." Sophie sat down in the chair across from Maya's, folding her hands in her lap. They were shaking slightly. "Adrian says you can see the truth. That must be a terrible gift." Maya let out a surprised laugh. "Most people think it would be amazing. All the lies you could catch, all the deception you could avoid. But the truth isn't always kind." Sophie's eyes met hers, and Maya saw understanding there. Sometimes the truth is the cruelest thing of all. They sat in silence for a moment, two young women caught in impossible circumstances, and Maya felt something shift between them. Not quite friendship, they didn't know each other well enough for that, but recognition. Kinship. "What did you see?" Maya asked quietly. "That made someone want to kill you?" Sophie's hands clenched tighter. "A council member, vampire elite. He was feeding on someone, a young man, in an alley near my apartment. But he didn't just feed. He tortured him first, played with him. The sounds." She stopped, swallowing hard. "I ran. But he saw me. And now his people are hunting me, because I'm a witness to his crime. Because in vampire law, killing humans for sport is forbidden, and he could lose everything if I testify." "Adrian's protecting you from a council member?" Maya felt ice slide down her spine. "Is that wise?" "Probably not." Sophie's smile was bitter. "But he gave me his word, and for someone like Adrian, that means everything, even if it costs him." Maya thought about that later, lying in the too-soft bed of the guest room Adrian had assigned her. The house was silent around her. In that particular way, houses full of vampires were silent. No breathing, no heartbeats, no sounds of life. Just the occasional creak of old wood and the whisper of movement that could have been wind or something more deliberate. She was drifting towards sleep when her door opened. Maya sat up with a gasp, reaching automatically for the lamp, but a cold hand caught her wrist before she could turn it on. "Don't scream," Adrian's voice said in the darkness. "It's me." "You can't just break into someone's room in the middle of the night," Maya hissed, her heart trying to hammer its way out of her chest. "It's my house, and it's not the middle of the night for me." She felt him move, settling into the chair beside her bed with that impossible grace. In the darkness, she could just make out his silhouette. "I wanted to check on you. This is harder than I expected it to be." "Finding the traitor? Having you here." Something in his voice made her breath catch. "You're so alive, Maya. So warm. It's like having the sun in my house." Maya didn't know what to say to that. After a moment, she asked, "How old are you?" 5 centuries, give or take." She heard the smile in his voice. "I was turned during a very unpleasant war. Died on a battlefield. Woke up 3 days later hungry enough to eat my way through a village." "Did you?" "No." The smile faded from his voice. My maker stopped me, taught me control, taught me that what we are doesn't have to define what we do. A pause. Most of the time. Maya pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. Why do you care so much? About Sophie, I mean. You're a vampire king. Surely one human girl isn't worth risking everything. Because the moment we stop caring about individual human lives is the moment we become the monsters they fear. His voice was quiet but intense. I've spent 500 years trying not to be a monster, Maya. Some days I succeed better than others. She thought about what Sophie had said, about truth being cruel, and found herself asking, what do you see when you look at me? The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I see someone who's been invisible her entire life. Someone who learned to make herself small and quiet because the alternative was too dangerous. Someone who's brave enough to walk into a house full of vampires because she loves her mother more than she fears death. Another pause. I see someone who could be extraordinary if she stopped hiding. Maya's throat felt tight. No one had ever seen her like that. No one had ever looked past the careful invisibility to the person underneath. You should sleep, Adrian said, standing in one fluid motion. Tomorrow will be difficult. I believe we're close to finding our traitor, and that means they're going to get desperate. He was right. The next evening, everything changed. Maya was in the library with Thomas, asking him carefully casual questions about his movements over the past few weeks, when she felt it. The distinctive pulse of a lie so big it almost knocked her sideways. Thomas was smiling his easy smile, talking about visiting an old friend upstate, and underneath every word was a darkness that tasted like betrayal. You're lying, Maya said flatly. Thomas's smile didn't waver. Everyone lies about something, sweetheart. Not like this. Maya stood up, her heart racing. You're the one. You're telling them where Sophie is. For a moment, Thomas just looked at her. Then his smile changed, becoming something colder, sharper. Clever girl. Pity. He moved fast, vampire fast, but Maya was already backing toward the door. She almost made it. Then his hand closed around her throat, lifting her off her feet with casual, terrible strength. Nothing personal, Thomas said pleasantly, even as Maya's vision started to go gray around the edges. But the council pays better than Adrian, and you're too dangerous to leave alive. Maya clawed at his hand, unable to breathe, unable to scream. Distantly, she thought this was a stupid way to die. She'd survived 24 years with her gift intact, and she was going to die because she'd been too slow, too human, too. Thomas's hand disappeared. Maya hit the floor, gasping, and through her swimming vision she saw Adrian standing between her and Thomas. She'd never seen Adrian move that fast. She'd never seen him look that angry. Mine, Adrian said, and it wasn't quite a word. It was a growl, a snarl, a promise of violence. She's under my protection, and you betrayed my house. Thomas had the sense to look afraid. Adrian, listen. He didn't get to finish. Adrian moved, and then Thomas was against the wall with Adrian's hand around his throat exactly where Thomas's had been around Maya's moments before. The difference was that Adrian could crush a vampire's throat if he wanted to, and from the look on his face, he very much wanted to. Give me one reason, Adrian said softly. Why I shouldn't kill you right now. Because you need me to testify against the council member who hired me, Thomas gasped. Because I know all his plans. Because I'm more valuable alive. Adrian's hand tightened. For a terrible moment, Maya thought he was going to kill Thomas anyway. Consequences be damned. Then slowly, he pulled back. "You'll tell me everything," Adrian said. "Every conversation, every meeting, every piece of information you sold. And then you'll stand before the council and confess. Or I'll do things to you that will make you beg for death." He meant it. Maya could see it in every line of his body, hear it in every word. This was the king, the ancient thing that had survived 5 centuries by being more dangerous than anything that threatened him. Thomas nodded quickly. "Anything. I'll do anything." Adrian turned to Maya, and his expression shifted so fast it was like watching someone change masks. Suddenly he looked almost human again. Concerned, careful, gentle. "Are you hurt?" Maya shook her head, still not quite able to speak. Her throat ached where Thomas had grabbed her, and she suspected there would be bruises tomorrow. Adrian crossed the space between them and dropped to one knee beside her, his hands hovering like he wanted to touch her but didn't dare. "I'm sorry. I should have been here sooner. I should have—" He stopped himself, jaw clenching. "Can you stand?" With his help, Maya made it to her feet. Her legs felt like water, but she forced them to hold her weight. Adrian's hands on her arms were cold and steady, and she found herself leaning into him without meaning to. "We need to secure Thomas," she managed to say, "and warn Sophie." "Already done." Adrian's voice was grim. "I called for Marcus the moment I felt your fear. He's with Sophie now." His hands tightened almost imperceptibly on her arms. "Your fear. I could feel it through the entire house. Like a scream." Maya looked up at him, confused. "How?" "I don't know." And for the first time he sounded unsettled. "But when you were in danger, I knew. And nothing in 500 years has ever made me move that fast." They stood there in the library, surrounded by ancient books and older secrets, and Maya felt something shift between them. It was like the moment in the gallery when their eyes first met, except stronger now, deeper. Recognition or resonance or something that didn't have a name. "Don't panic," Adrian murmured, his gray eyes holding hers. "Just act like we're married," Maya blinked. "What?" But before he could answer, the library doors burst open and Celeste rushed in, with Marcus and 2 other vampires behind her. They all stopped at the threshold, taking in the scene. Thomas slumped against the wall, Adrian kneeling beside Maya, the marks already darkening on her throat. "The council is here," Celeste said urgently. "They've invoked sanctuary rights. They're demanding entry, and we can't refuse." Adrian's expression went cold. "How many?" 5 members, including Councillor Ashford. The name made Thomas flinch. Adrian noticed, and his smile was terrible. "The one who hired you. How convenient." He stood, pulling Maya up with him, and she suddenly understood why he'd said what he had about being married. The vampires at the door were all staring at her with varying expressions of confusion and calculation, trying to understand why their king would be protecting a human with such intensity. "Councillor Ashford must not discover Maya's gift," Adrian said quietly, speaking to his assembled vampires but keeping his eyes on her face. "As far as anyone knows, she's my consort, someone I value personally. The council respects pair bonds. It's one of our oldest laws. They won't touch her if they believe she's mine." "And if they don't believe it?" Maya asked, her voice coming out smaller than she meant it to. Adrian's hand moved to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing over her jawline with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Then we make them believe it." He leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers, the gesture surprisingly intimate, and Maya felt that strange resonance between them flare brighter. This close, she could see flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could smell something like winter and old stone, could feel the absolute lack of warmth that should have been terrifying but somehow wasn't. "Trust me," he breathed against her skin. "For the next hour, you're the most important thing in my world. Act like it." Then he straightened and turned to face his vampires, his expression shifting back into the cold authority of a king. "Bring the council to the formal receiving room. Make them comfortable, but make them wait. I'll be there shortly." After the others left, Adrian moved to a cabinet and pulled out a heavy silk robe in deep crimson. "Put this on over your clothes. It's mine. They'll recognize the scent." Maya took it with shaking hands. The fabric was cool and impossibly soft, and when she pulled it around her shoulders, she was engulfed in that winter stone smell that was distinctly Adrian's. It felt like armor and trap all at once. "What do I have to do?" she asked. "Stay close to me. Let me touch you. Nothing inappropriate, but vampires communicate through contact and scent. If I put my arm around you or take your hand, don't pull away." His eyes met hers seriously. "And whatever you do, don't look directly at Counselor Ashford. Don't give him any reason to focus on you specifically. Because he'll sense what I am. Because old vampires like him have ways of reading people that have nothing to do with abilities like yours. And if he realizes you can see through lies..." Adrian didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Maya nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. "Okay, I can do this. I know you can." Adrian held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Maya took it. His fingers closed around hers, cold and strong, and she felt that pulse of recognition again. Like they were two parts of something that fit together, even though that was impossible. They walked through the house together, and Maya tried not to think about the fact that she was about to face a room full of ancient vampires while pretending to be in love with their king. Tried not to think about Thomas's hand around her throat or the bruises forming on her skin. Tried not to think about the way Adrian's thumb was tracing small circles on the back of her hand, so gentle it made her want to cry. The formal receiving room was even more impressive than the rest of the house. All dark wood paneling and furniture that belonged in a castle. 5 vampires sat arranged around the space with the kind of careful positioning that spoke of power games Maya didn't fully understand. 4 of them merely looked ancient and dangerous. The 5th one, sitting in the place of honor, made the hair on the back of Maya's neck stand up. Counselor Ashford was handsome in the way poisonous things were beautiful. Dark-haired, sharp-featured, with eyes that seemed to swallow light. When those eyes landed on Maya, she felt him looking through her, dissecting her, categorizing her as threat or tool or prey. She forced herself to look away, to lean into Adrian instead, playing the role of devoted consort. Adrian's arm came around her waist, pulling her against his side, and she felt him project that same terrible authority he'd shown in the library.